Hello, my name is Lesley Atherton, and this is my story called Sugar Daddies Want You. Her hair, blonde and shiny, had been straightened to a metallic, unmoving sheen, her eyes blue and long-lashed, her skin bronzed, prettified and petrified by thousands of pounds worth of beauty treatments. She was exquisite. She knew it, and so did Mallory. She called her benefactor Mallory, and wasn't a bit concerned that it wasn't his legally given name. She was Mallory's special little princess, and that was all that mattered. She simpered prettily to herself. Special little princess? The poor gullible billionaire didn't have a clue about who she was and what she wanted. The time had come for her to change her tactics a little, as Mallory was becoming more demanding. It happened before with Colm. Both men were nice enough, and yes, she enjoyed their generosity. After all, that was what it was all about. But they simply didn't understand the rules of the game. And, oh yes, it was a game that she was committed to winning. It was becoming apparent that, despite Mallory's obvious devotion to her, his dismissal date was overdue. Last month, in return for the large flat, the clothes and the financial allowance he paid, he also demanded that she met him for dinner and intimacy on 3 occasions when his wife was out of town. There had also been 4 telephone calls, and that was just unacceptable. It was smothering. Mallory was definitely outliving his usefulness. It was time to find someone else. She must do that before letting Mallory go, of course, and the new benefactor would have to be just as giving, preferably more so, and not quite so demanding. It was time to log on once again to www.sugardaddieswantyouBad2.com. She was looking forward to it. As usual, it would be reassuring to use her carefully constructed looks and attitude as the golden key to unlock the door to all her specific material requirements. She called herself Jewel, the name given to her by her very first benefactor, intentionally implied preciousness, shininess, prettiness and rarity. She had liked it from the start, and she liked how he'd say in his rich Edinburgh accent, "The implication is also the truth, precious Jewel." He told her repeatedly that there was nobody quite like her, and she'd believed him. And now, as she peered at her cushiony skin, puffed up by Botox and chemical peels, she preened her hair with Moroccan oil and checked her appearance in minute detail. She knew without the smallest of doubts that he had been right. She would very definitely do, though the mink eyelash extensions were a little short, and her haute-couture dress a little long. But Sheila, the mouse who made minute alterations to her already immaculately fitted garments, would remedy that for practically nothing. Jewel despised Sheila, though she admitted her usefulness. Jewel liked useful people. She'd lived her 27 years with a growing awareness that only useful people mattered. There was no point to falling in love. There was no point to loyalty. The purpose of life was to get as much as possible in as short a time as possible. Because one day looks would fade a little, the money giver will stop giving, and there will be talk of marriage to a suitable man who will supply your every need, and supply a list of demands in return. His list would inevitably include children, cooking, laundry, and a domestic life. Servitude, she sniffed. It was most certainly not for her. She had to reap everything from the alternative while she still could. After that, well, she dared not think about the dreaded middle age. Later that day, Sheila had worked on the 4mm hem reduction to Jewel's silk layers, while the dress's owner shipped champagne cocktails at Tantric. She'd chosen this glamorous bar specifically owing to its location. It was next to the Marsland Hotel, where she was due to meet her latest potential. This potential had discovered her from amongst thousands of available young women on her favourite sugar daddy's website. He called himself Gareth, and it was in this case probably his real name. Experience taught her that he wasn't her usual type. He wasn't one of the cleverer and more devious potentials, or one with an assumed name indicating secret wife and family. Gareth had almost sounded too nice. In fact, she'd been tempted to refuse their meeting, but something about him got her thinking that perhaps he was worth a try just once. After all, he was seriously good-looking, and that was quite unusual in a benefactor of his extreme wealth. Now, in the ladies' room of the Marsland Hotel, Jewel took one final look at herself in the mirror. Gareth had told her he liked women to be understated, classy and elegant, and it was important that she comply with his precise requirements. A crisply defined smudge of brownie peach lipstick subtly yet sensually enhanced her pouting lips, and her classic diamond drop earrings and matching necklace drew attention to her neck and cleavage, as did her chocolate brown silk handmade dress and her immaculate unmoving hair. Jewel's heels completed the outfit. They were just high enough to accentuate her incredible lightly muscled legs, and just low enough to ensure she would look up gracefully to all but the shortest of potentials. That was such an important factor, and one so often forgotten by other less experienced princesses in similar positions. She checked her legs. Her stockings were seamed and straight. She was ready. So, 5 minutes after their agreed meeting time, Jewel picked up her cappuccino-coloured leather clutch bag and left the ladies' room. She was confident, a billionaire worth of confident. After all, each and every potential so far had, gratifyingly, wanted her more than she wanted him. And if the worst came to the worst, there was always Bunny, who she would meet on Friday if Gareth didn't work out. Mallory would simply have to accept that things were over between them. It was as simple as that. There was no room for sentimentality with a benefactor. They knew the game rules as well as she did. She looked around the plush hotel lobby for Gareth. It was always necessary, she felt, to see a potential in her true and natural setting. One potential had suggested they meet in a Starbucks. As he enjoyed the earthier side of life, she immediately blocked him. If a potential proved to be uncomfortable in her kind of setting, then he clearly wasn't Mr. Right, and would forever be relegated to the useless pile. That's what had happened with her husband. Could she see Gareth? She wasn't sure. There were plenty of men gliding across the marbled floor, oozing wealth and confidence in their Milanese shoes and unfettered suits. All looked effortlessly affluent, but she was certain that they weren't him. Gareth would need to turn up quickly. One of today's lobby cruisers might easily become a potential if she was forced to wait any longer. She quickly and discreetly checked her phone. There were no messages from Gareth, and no men in the lobby who looked anything like his profile photograph. He was tall and blonde, smooth-looking, yet with a rough edge. A public school rugby player, he'd told her. It made sense. His promised monthly income, it was always the first point Jewel discussed with a potential benefactor, and the charm of his pretty little home in Knightsbridge more than compensated for that. But where was he? She perched on the edge of a dark green leather armchair, as out of place as would be the entire contents of her parents' tiny dated council house being crammed into the sleek minimalist room of her current apartment. The most important thing about the old green armchair was its position. She knew from past experience that it was possible to survey the entire lobby while leaning daintily against it. And wait, that must be him. The man, tall, fair, muscled, confident and beautiful in every way, was immaculately dressed, and he was casing the room just as she was, ready to leave at a moment's notice if his princess-to-be didn't meet with his expectations. Jewel was impressed, despite herself. Perhaps this potential wouldn't be yet another innocent lamb to the slaughter. They spotted each other at exactly the same moment, and instinctively he moved towards her. She had made an impression. She was sure of it, and was sure she'd gained her first point in the Jewel versus Gareth match. 1-0, she thought. Gareth stopped and tapped his mobile. Jewel's phone rang, and she jumped. "Oh, good, that's your phone. You must be Jewel," he said, as he took the final few footsteps towards her. "Good afternoon, Jewel." He was already charming and disarming her with his physical presence, and she reddened like a gauche adolescent. When had she ever done that before? Not even as an adolescent, she suspected. "You're every inch as beautiful in the flesh, Jewel. Shall we sit here?" It was more of a command than a question as he pointed to one of the lobby's matte leather sofas. "Yes, why not?" she replied, recovering her composure just a little. Wow, this guy made even Jewel feel nervy and naive, and that must have been a first. She was convinced that a pairing with Gareth would be very interesting indeed. Confident and bold, he looked her up and down. "Yeah, not bad at all," he concluded. Of course, Jewel was accustomed to objectification, but usually only after their benefactor had at least paid for a spa and a new dress. To treat her that way within moments of their meeting was definitely not acceptable. She would make this clear to him by the end of their meetings. Start as you mean to go on. By that time, he would be putty in her hands. "So," she asked nervously, "what shall we do?" She was immediately sorry. Such a question made her sound pushy, yet at the same time needy, like a little girl on her first proper date. What a fool she felt. He considered for a moment. "Let's stay here, have a drink. We have all the time in the world." He called the waiter over and ordered a whiskey and ginger for them both. What on earth gave him the right to choose her drink? She prickled. Usually she was the one calling the shots. But with this man, the unspoken rules were being ignored. Jewel had never managed to tolerate whiskey, but she knew that when it arrived, she wouldn't tell him that, and she wouldn't ask for another drink either. She wouldn't insist on choosing her own clothes. She would dress for him, sleep with him, and even enjoy his company. What was so different with this man, and how did she know it so quickly, so soon after meeting him? He was too good-looking, too confident, and too knowing. He could see right through her layers to see who she was, what she wanted, and how many people she'd trample on to get it. After their 3 drinks on the sofa, Gareth stood up and left. There had been no phone call or message to pull him away. He hadn't needed that excuse. He'd simply risen from his position on the sofa, shook her hand, kissed her cheek, and said goodbye. She sat open-mouthed, staring after him. How dare he? Well, that was an experience, Jewel thought, as she let herself into her flat half an hour later. She hadn't bothered hanging around looking for a further benefactor. Gareth had confused her, and she needed time to think. Gareth had been cheeky, charming, and disarming, but hadn't made a pass at her. That was unusual in itself, but what was even more unusual was that he'd also given her the clear impression that there was no chemistry between them. She was gutted. He'd been the only potential benefactor in a long time who had come close to making her interested in him for who he was, rather than the size of his wallet. A bath was her only solution, and as the oily water spread over her body, Jewel allowed herself to reflect on Gareth's body. He was utterly delicious, and she desperately wanted to see him again. A key turned in the lock. Mallory, she mouthed to herself. He was the only other key holder. Shit, he hates seeing me in the bath. She struggled to get out. "I won't be a moment, darling, don't worry." He shouted into her. "Take as long as you like. Make the most of your last bath here. You're out. Tonight." Jewel tensed. "Darling, you're joking, of course. What are you talking about?" "One word. Gareth. My son. A little test for you. You failed." Jewel's tears began as she moved out of the bath and wrapped the layers of Egyptian cotton round her body, being sure to allow Mallory a lingering glimpse of what he would soon be missing. So that was the situation. Gareth was Mallory's son. Somehow she felt better. She now knew that her charm wasn't failing. She walked past Mallory towards the sofa where she'd left her laptop. "You're leaving tonight," he demanded. But Jewel was a sparkling star and a golden beacon of femininity. She was not lost. She was not evicted. She was floating, searching, and waiting for the next benefactor. "Yes, yes," she said irritably. "Goodbye, Jewel." Mallory walked towards the door. "Bye-bye, Mallory," she whispered, as she logged once again onto www.sugardaddyswantyouBad2.com.